We are at the George Aull Natural Area, which is in the south part of the Clemson Forest. I'm Dr. Thea Hagen. We are at this site because it is a remnant of a late successional forest that you might have seen in Clemson. The trees here are 200 plus years old, which means pre-Civil War trees, the large ones. So this site likely was never cut out and planted in cotton due primarily to its steepness. So it's a small, very steep site that was unsuitable, completely unsuitable for planting cotton. So they left the trees there. We have a big, large, old, late successional canopy. The trees are at least 100 feet. The largest yellow poplar here is 130 feet tall. The canopy, however, is not fully closed because we have a lot of these big old trees that are falling out now. A lot of them are tipping over because of the steepness of the site when they get so tall. We have a stratified mid-story with lots of different layers, and you have the reproduction of these late successional species throughout the mid-story. So we have some trees that are ready to come in and recruit into the canopy as the large older trees fall out. We also have diverse but not super thick or impenetrable ground cover. All of the species here indicate that it's a mesic site, and this site has not been managed by Clemson. So we're in part of the Clemson Forest. It's called the South Forest, just off from the Pendleton plant, the All Natural area. They haven't come in here and cut any timber out or anything, primarily because the site is so steep. So it's being allowed to proceed without human intervention. I just heard a train in the distance, but to a large degree this site is completely unmanaged, and while there are surrounding land use, most of it plantation pine, it is mostly unimpacted by the humans surrounding it. The site is extremely steep, so that's one thing I want you to think about. So when we think about remnants and using them for restoration ecology, we think about using them as maybe a reference system, something that you could set as a goal or a target. So while these might be some of the species, if your goal is eventually to get a late successional forest on your restoration site here in the upstate, some of these species might be good targets. We do have an extreme steepness here that you might not find at your site. So that changes, of course, the way the species are distributed throughout the site and what's growing there as well. The other thing to note is even though we're on a very steep slope, there is little to no erosion. So we have intact leaf litter. I'm gonna dig a little hole so you can see what the soil looks like. We haven't lost all the topsoil here to cotton farming as we have in most of the upstate. So I'm standing here in a root tip-up mound, or the divot created when the roots, so this is an old basswood tree that fell. You can see a lot of it's rotted, a lot of the roots are already gone. You can still see there's a lot of soil these roots hold, but the interesting thing is the topography or micro topography that's created when one of these big old trees falls out. So you can see plants are starting to recruit into this area, but it's creating almost some level spots in this extremely steep site. So this is a site where, they aren't coming in and cutting out, so these trees are just naturally dying and falling. You see a lot of the big older trees here. There's another one right next to it, even older, and rotting. This is an interesting phenomenon that happens in these areas that are being naturally managed or unmanaged. And the other thing I want to show is the soil. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the soil here too. So again, you can see, and we've shown you that the slope is very steep, but we have a lot of the leaf litter layer being allowed to stay, rot, and decompose. And when you start digging down through it, you get this beautiful black soil as opposed to that red clay that's under almost everything. So you can dig down quite a bit here before you finally get to the clay. So again, this is a good thing when you think about a target for a reference system. Think about, measuring the depth of the litter layer we have here. So I've got 3 inches of decomposing litter layer, and then the loose dry stuff from the last year on top, another 2 or 3 inches of that from looking at the shovel. So that's another good measurable target or goal by looking at the soil here. And again, if this site wasn't so steep, we would have even greater litter accumulation. So we have climbed to the bottom of the slope here of the all natural area. We're at the creek that flows through the bottom of the site. And again, it's draining a really steep area. Some things I want you to note is this creek in a primarily unimpacted area. It has a lot of natural meander to it, which is something that you lose when you have a lot of impervious surfaces. The water flows off those very quickly and makes the creek straighten out. The other thing is that this creek has access to this floodplain, which I'm actually standing in. So the banks aren't that high, so during heavy rainfall events, it can easily climb up and out of the banks and spread out, which is what creeks and streams do in natural areas. Right now, we've had a very rainy spring. In the last few days, we haven't had a lot of rain, but you can still see there's a good amount of water flowing through the creek. And that will continue on, except in cases of severe drought, because the soil will slowly release that rain moisture over weeks and even months in a natural area where there aren't many impervious surfaces. The other thing that I want to talk about here, the last few things that I want to mention are the natural spacing, the sort of random spacing or placement of the large trees as we look around and upslope here in the all natural area. The trees are random, you could tell they weren't planted, but they have they grow and give each other enough space. So they, two large trees won't grow too close together. There's too much competition and one will lose out. So you have a good amount of space, although it is sort of random between the large trees, especially as we lose some falling out. And then the other thing to mention in this site is while it's not 100% invasive or exotic free, they are at a very minimal level here. So in many places in the Clemson forest, when you look out at a mid-story like this, you see just huge thickets of silverthorn or Chinese privet. And here we really don't have that. So that's another thing that makes this a good reference site and indicative of it being a remnant. We found on the other side of the creek here, the forest isn't as old. There was actually an old home site on that site on the other side of the creek. And we've actually found this old metal pot today in the creek, which is kind of a neat finding. So this side was too steep to farm. The side on the other side of the creek here, the trees are younger and probably were farmed and have grown back in since the 1930s.